Okay, so getting into really Action Comics as part of the Superman Reborn aftermath, this creates a pretty interesting scenario for us. And the reason why is because of the fact that what this does is basically give us like this new and updated origin story of Superman. It basically kind of like wipes away all the new 52 stuff, which is really interesting because the question that we kind of have to ask here is this just Superman or is it everyone in the DC universe? They just don't know it yet. Maybe it's just kind of a phase thing. Maybe it's just like the whole idea that eventually we'll step into the notion of, you know, all the other superheroes being rebooted. We're not 100% sure. At this point right now, it's just Superman. Now, to provide a little bit of context for people who are just now stepping into the realm of DC Comics and just kind of getting into all these different superheroes and so on. When DC first launched the New 52 in 2011, as far as we knew, there was just the New 52 Superman, and he was written to be younger, less experienced, and the whole purpose of all of his stories in the New 52 was to give us a context in terms of how he becomes the more experienced Superman, how he eventually becomes a Superman that we learn to know and love before the New 52. And so because of that, he was brash, he was a little more headstrong, didn't quite have the wisdom of his, of how he was before the New 52. But the issue is that fans just didn't really like him, and they just didn't really, it didn't really resonate with them. For new Superman readers, it was about as close as they got to the original guy that they knew and loved, and it was the only Superman story that you were reading at the time. So because of that, you were able to get, some interesting concepts, but on the whole, for really the largely traditional Superman fan base, as large as they are, it just wasn't cutting it. And so the result was that sales started slipping. And so what DC did is they initiated a story called The Final Days of Superman. And The Final Days of Superman were basically just designed to set the stage for the death of the New 52 Superman. And so what DC did during this time, because of the fact that the post-DCU, going into the tail end of the New 52, because of the fact that it was designed to set the stage for really DC Rebirth, what DC did is they came back and they wrote a story called Superman, Lois, and Clark. And this is when the waters began to get a little bit murkier. And the reason why was because of the fact that what that story did is it established that where previously all we thought in the New 52 was that there was just the New 52 Superman, in reality, the pre-New 52 Superman had been there the entire time, and we just didn't know. We, for the longest time, believed that the pre-New 52 Superman appeared because of the events of Convergence, and we don't really need to go super deep into that. All it really did is set the stage for DC to kind of bring those characters in, to kind of inject them into the New 52. That was the most logical assumption to make. You had Convergence, A led to B, and then it just kind of went into its own thing, and that was really it. Now, of course, because of the fact that this was setting the stage for the return of the pre-New 52 Superman as we knew him, with the final days of the New 52 Superman and his passing, the pre-New 52 Superman took its place. And so that's how DC Rebirth went forward. We effectively had the pre-New 52 Superman inside the New 52 universe as part of DC Rebirth. At least that was the thought that was originally given to us. The cool thing about this aftermath is that it shifts things up, because what we ended up finding out in Superman Reborn, of course you'll find that video here on my channel, what we ended up finding out is that when the New 52 Superman died, his energies were just kind of corporeal. They were just kind of out there, and that was really it. I mean, some of them went into Lois Lane, some of them went into Lana Lang, but essentially everything that made the New 52 Superman who he was just kind of floating out there. During Superman Reborn, these energies merged with the pre-New 52 Superman, giving us the Reborn Superman. And so what this story does is explore the fallout from that, and what does it mean for the Superman landscape. And so the cool thing is that this initially picks up with the kind of uneasiness, that Clark Kent's been feeling, because remember, after the whole fact that he's been reborn, his unease comes from something that he can't quite put his finger on. And so what he ends up doing is transitioning back to the Fortress of Solitude and basically going through all these history crystals that essentially give us his brand new origin. And that's the crazy thing here, because what this does is basically retcon the New 52 out of continuity. It's almost like it didn't happen. And so it's really kind of crazy how this unfolds, because again, it kind of brings us all back to the very beginning. It takes us to the early days of Krypton, or really to the 11th hour of Krypton, in the sense that it is basically on its deathbed. The father of Superman, Jor-El, basically went to Kryptonian council and said, look, our planet's going to be destroyed. You have to do something. We have to make fleets. We have to evacuate. The council basically ignored him, and that was it. Notice here that we also get Kara Zor-El. We get the cousin of Clark Kent, or I guess of Superman, in this equation. So what this is doing is rolling her back in. It's including her into all this, making her the cousin of Superman. Now, that was already established. That's not new. new, but again, it really just kind of ties into the idea that they're not leaving her out. She's still very much intertwined with the history of Superman. Now, the reason why that matters is because of the fact that after Crisis on Infinite Earths, one of the whole aspects of that massive reboot was to basically take Superman away from being one of many Supermen, because before Crisis on Infinite Earths, you had Superman and you had Supergirl, and then you had Power Girl from a different universe, and you had Krypto, the super dog, and you had Comet, the super horse, and you had Beppo, the super monkey, and you had all these super powered beings all based on Superman, which was just a reflection of the fact that he was so powerful and so popular in the realm of DC Comics. But the problem was Superman was billed as the last son of Krypton, the last survivor of Krypton. If he's the last survivor of Krypton, how do you explain Supergirl? How do you explain Superhorse, Supercat, Superdog, and how do you explain all these different things? And so Crisis on Infinite Earths went back and said, now Superman is the only survivor of Krypton. Well, Supergirl was still extremely popular, and so they brought her back, but they basically made her like a robot kind of thing, like weird amalgamation of things from like a different universe or something along those lines. This is DC basically saying, we are not repeating Crisis on Infinite Earths. We are not going forward making Superman the only survivor of Krypton and there's no one else. There's also still Supergirl. That's how we square the circle of her character being alive in DC Rebirth. Now, of course, from here, it really just kind of goes on into the whole notion of the fact that he was sent away, on a dying planet. He landed on Earth, Krypton was destroyed, and he was discovered by Jonathan and Martha Kent. Now, something else that's also important here is the character of Pete Ross. Pete Ross did not exist in the New 52. As far as I'm aware, there's no indication that he was ever alive in the New 52, but he was one of the closest childhood friends of Superman when he was on Earth in Smallville. What this also does is this basically brings in Jeff Johns' Superman Secret Origin to the equation and makes it official. And so because of that, it actually makes it really kind of interesting because, this gives us a reason now to go back and cover that. And that's really one of the kind of things that I was waiting for. I was looking for an opportune time, especially now since we're doing the New 52 Batman. If that's successful and if people are interested in that, then we'll do the New 52 Superman. And we'll basically cover the origin of Superman before the New 52 as part of Secret Origin, or we might even just do it now, just for the sake of having it out there since this story's there now and it's grabbing all those things and bringing them in. But again, a lot of this stuff still stays pretty similar in the sense that Lana Lang is still the childhood friend of Clark Kent, in the sense that she's the one that basically taught him how to use his powers once he had them. There's the whole Day of the Tornado, which we saw in Jeff Johns' Secret Origin of Superman. There's Lex Luthor as a kid who discovered, kryptonite, different things like that. All the origin aspects of Jeff Johns' Superman Secret Origin are rolled into this, and all of it basically dead ends into his traveling to Metropolis to become Superman. Now, one little thing that I want to poke on here, and we'll actually find out, at the end of the video what this is about, but there's someone who's basically speaking to Superman in a very muffled and small voice, almost completely and totally discernible. It's actually so quiet that the sensors within the Fortress of Solitude cannot pick up on what the voice is saying. You don't even know that it's there. Superman is the only one who can hear it. So again, it's just really this idea that whoever it is that's talking knows that really small space, that gap between what Superman can hear and what the voice detectors in the Fortress will pick up. But from this point going forward, this is when we start to get into the idea of eliminating the entirety of the New 52 Superman history and replacing it with a new one. Now, the reason why this is significant is because of the fact that if you end up going out and you decide that you want to start reading New 52 Superman, if you're new to the Superman landscape, if you're just getting into DC Rebirth and you want to know all the lead up that got to this, if you go back to the New 52, you're going to find two stories or two comic books. You're going to find Superman and you're going to find Action Comics. You'll probably pick up Superman first since that's the title that's the more recognizable, and then somewhere along the line it'll say, see Action Comics. You'll go pick up Action Comics and you'll be confused. And the reason why is because you'll see two stories taking place at two different times. When DC first launched the New 52, they gave us the Superman comics, which took place in the modern day of the New 52. When we got Action Comics, when we got New 52 Action Comics, those took place 5 years in the past and basically covered the older days of Superman. Now that lasted for the first 18 issues. In issue number 19 going forward, then it jumped by 5 years and took place in the modern day. But the fact remains here, I wanted to throw that out there for those of you guys who are going to be new or going to be getting into Superman and that kind of a thing. But the fact remains here that again, what this does is continue going over his history within Metropolis, operating under the guise of Clark Kent, being a reporter, different things like that. But it also goes over the history of the villains that he'd fought. Darkseid, Mr. Mxyzptlk, Imperiex, of course, this being from the 1990s. Superman, the Man of Energy, when he went against Brainiac. Basically, what it's saying is that all the history of Superman between Crisis on Infinite Earths and the New 52 reboot in 2011, all that history is still intact. All that history still happened. It's still there. Not only that, we also pick up with the idea of him fighting Doomsday, being beaten to death by Doomsday. Now, something else that I'd also like you to notice too is that it does cover the reign of the Superman. For those of you guys who don't know, when DC killed off Superman in 1992, 1993, or whatever it was, they launched a year-long series of stories called The Reign of the Superman. At least I think it was a year. But basically, it introduced 4 new Supermen. You had Cyborg Superman, Hank Henshaw, who was the one responsible for destroying Coast City and sending Hal Jordan down this insane path where he eventually declared himself to be Parallax. There was John Henry Irons, who was a guy that had no powers, but basically fashioned himself a giant steel Superman suit. And then there was the Eradicator. Notice here, there's no Metropolis Kid. There's no Connor Kent. He was one of the people who showed up. He was basically cloned to be Superman, called himself the Metropolis Kid or something along those lines. He's nowhere to be seen here. Now, whether he was left out accidentally or whether he was left out intentionally is something that we don't know, and we might find out later on down the line, but he's not here. He's not being included. And this begs a litany of questions. Is it because of the fact that they're trying to keep the continuity clean, and so they just simply don't want to invoke any kind of answers or anything like that about Superboy? Is it because DC just doesn't want to treat him like he exists anymore? Or is it because they're going to do something like bring back Superboy Prime and they don't want 2 Superboys running around at the same time? We don't know the answer to that question. At this point, it's really just kind of guesswork and speculation. But again, things like Superman marrying Lois Lane, revealing his identity to her, things like Superman having his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, pass away, those things are all still intact. Now, this is where the whole idea begins to shift, and this is where the whole idea begins to change. We're not exactly given this history. We're not exactly given this change. The implication here of this story right now as it exists is that this is the history of Superman in the New 52. That's what's so mind-blowing about this, because all this is all history of Superman before the New 52. And so the implication seems to be that this is the history of Superman in the New 52. That begs the question, what were we reading when the New 52 first started? What was all that stuff that was going on? But notice this, there was not a lot of grandiose storytelling. I mean, you don't really think back to the New 52 run of Superman and recollect on things like the death of Superman against Doomsday, Imperiex invading planet Earth and trying to eliminate everybody, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis. There were no stories like that surrounding Superman in the New 52. So really, it'd be pretty easy to wipe that away. There's just not enough history there to have made him very significant. And so again, it's really just kind of a wild scenario here. But the fact remains, getting into the time in which Lois Lane became pregnant, this of course leads to Superman basically moving away from Metropolis, setting up residence in the Fortress of Solitude, and then of course calling Batman and calling Wonder Woman to his side, the Trinity, more or less, Lois Lane giving birth to their child. Now, this is when the whole idea of Superman, Lois and Clark and the New 52 Superman begin to blend together. When Superman, Lois and Clark came out, and it was basically this story that introduced the pre-New 52 Superman to the New 52 universe, they took up residence in Hamilton. And the reason why that was done, the explanation that was given to us at the time, was because of the fact that with the pre-New 52 Superman in the New 52 universe, and the New 52 universe already having its own Superman, the pre-New 52 Superman wanted to stay in the background. He didn't want anybody to know he was there. At the same time, he donned a black uniform and he basically fought behind the scenes. He would save these small little skirmishes or get engaged in these small little skirmishes. He would basically jump in and he would save like a train that was going to go careening off the tracks or something along those lines. Things that the New 52 Superman either didn't know about or didn't have the foresight to see was coming later on down the road. And so because of that, what this does is it tells us that's not the case. The reason why Superman and Lois Lane moved to Hamilton was because of the fact that they wanted to basically stay off the radar. Again, it was this idea that, essentially there was no New 52 Superman. They're all just one singular person. This is a whole new history here, a whole new retcon being introduced. And so again, what it did is it allowed him to remain behind the scenes, but at the same time, it also allowed him to function as Superman publicly. So he could effectively be in 2 places at once. Now, the only other explanation that I can think of that makes sense to this, the only other explanation I can think of that could possibly make this make sense in any form or fashion is that the memories that Superman is picking up right now are the memories of both the New 52 and the pre-New 52 Superman, in the sense that it's almost like there's 2 sets of memories in his own mind. But that's not the implication that's given here. The indication that's given here is that there's one cohesive history, not two cohesive histories. You know, the idea is that he's going through his own origin story, and his own origin story follows that he both functioned as Superman in the public eye and functioned as Superman in the background, keeping his family safe. That he basically put on a disguise, he put on a mask, and tricked the world into believing that there was a legit Superman out there, when in reality, he was basically keeping his family safe and making a bunch of noise over here so nobody would look over there. Again, a lot of questions are being asked here. A lot of information is being dumped here to the point that there's really gonna have to be a lot of explanation later on down the line. But if we go with the idea that this is true, if we go with the idea that Superman Reborn basically merged the New 52 Superman and the pre-New 52 Superman into a singular being and established a whole new history, then that begs the question, what's going on? Is it that he basically woke up to what his real history was? That what we saw in the New 52 was an illusion? That it wasn't actually happening? It wasn't real? That it was some mask or some fake scenario that had been put on by somebody like Dr. Manhattan? You know, and if that's the case, then does that apply to Batman? Does it apply to Wonder Woman? Does it apply to Green Arrow, to Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns? Does it apply to all of them? Is all the history we've seen with them in the New 52, is that an illusion? Is it fake? That they're oblivious to their real history, which is basically everything before the New 52? That's kind of the question that's being asked here. And that's why all these different stories that are going on in DC Rebirth are so important, is because it basically hints at the idea that there's a much bigger scenario going on here. Because you got to think about it this way. If somebody had the power, let's like, for example, we kind of follow this timeline of events, all right? So let's say that we go back to Flashpoint, all right? Barry Allen wakes up one day, decides that it's a good idea to keep his mother from dying. He travels into the past, he saves her life. Because he saves her life, there was no motivation for him to become the Flash. At some key point along the line and, you know, in the timeline, it was necessary for Barry to be the Flash, but he wasn't there. And the Flashpoint universe spun out as a result of that. The Amazons and the Atlanteans went to war. You know, Aquaman, Wonder Woman ended up going to war with one another. Bruce Wayne was shot. Instead of Thomas and Martha Wayne, he died. And so Thomas Wayne became Batman and Martha Wayne became the Joker. All these crazy scenarios started unfolding. And so, okay, Barry Allen says, well, we have to prevent this universe from happening. So we're going to go back into the past again, and I'm going to let my mom die. That happens. And then the New 52 universe was born. Let's say that in that example, in that timeline, that Dr. Manhattan stepped in. And let's say that when he did step in, that where the actions of Barry Allen should have led to the universe going back to the way it was before the New 52, Dr. Manhattan stepped in and screwed with things. And that resulted in the formation of the New 52 universe. He said, well, you know what? Instead of things going back to the way they're supposed to be, let's take Superman and let's split him in half. Let's make him two totally separate people. And let's just see how that plays out. That would fit in with the idea of the pre-New 52 Superman and the pre-New 52 Lois Lane and their son, Jonathan Kent, just being there one day. And then the New 52 Superman's just running around doing his own thing. That would make sense. It's entirely possible that that's the case. But the fact that that's possible means that almost anything's possible. So it's kind of crazy in terms of how it all plays out. But I really hope you guys are getting kind of amped up about this idea of the Watchmen, because we got to think there's a guy out there, presumably Dr. Manhattan, with the power to manipulate the entirety of universes. And that really begs the question, if it's true, what can the Justice League do to stop him? What can anybody in the DC universe do to stop him? Because I would say if that's the kind of power he possesses, and the most powerful being we had ever seen in the DC universe was Mr. Mxyzptlk, and Mr. Mxyzptlk was powerless in the face of Dr. Manhattan, then there's never been an instance when any villain in the Justice League has ever emerged, or any villain in DC Comics has ever emerged with power on this scale. No one's ever appeared with that kind of an ability before, save for maybe the Presence, who's like the god in the DC universe, and he's appeared something like 20 times. So again, it creates kind of a wild scenario in terms of how things can unfold. But in any event, if you guys do feel yourselves a little bit lost, if you guys do feel yourselves a little bit confused, feel free to post your comments down in the comment section. I'll answer them as best I can. Also, make sure you check the Superman playlist so that you can get caught up on everything that's going on, and that'll probably answer a lot of the questions that you guys have. But if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.